Mr. Kicklighter.
Oh,
Oh.
thank you, Frank. Okay, I think. Okay. And welcome to our new Ollie member. And you have nothing to worry about. The tests are relatively simple. And I will always give you what you've got coming. You know, you'll get justice. Well, that's what we do, isn't it? No, it's wonderful to have you. It's particularly at this wonderful time of talking about Tudors and Stuarts, the 16th and 17th centuries, when many of us think that we are more or less going from the medieval period to the early modern. I'm not prepared, as many people say, that these Tudors are early modern myself, because I think that at least Henry VII and maybe even Henry VIII were pretty darn medieval. But I guess that means that sometimes you read books and they throw around these words so they don't have as much meaning as we would like. For example, you might have read where Henry VII is sometimes described as the first modern king of England, and you think, really? I don't think so, and I'll give you some reasons why I think so later. But the idea of the Tudors is, of course, that they are probably the most famous dynasty simply because of movies and novels and television and all the rest. I can't think of another one offhand, and certainly I would never compare the Tudors to any of my kings. You know, my earlier ones, I mean, I love them. Henry II, Henry III, Edward, I mean, those are dear to me. But if I went into the public, Elizabeth the Great, Henry VIII would win every time. So I understand that and I accept it. And we're going to do this relatively briefly because sadly we have only 6 sessions in this particular spring of Ollie. So I've got 3 for Tudors and 3 for their successors, because I'm going to try to chop off a king's head. I have plans to unite England and Scotland. Yeah, not necessarily happily, but sometimes that can be done. And remember, in case you were not already aware, that we will not be meeting here next week. We will instead be on Zoom and then returning here the following week for the rest of the time, for those who are going to be physically present. But we will all, well, we won't, but Frank and Sherry and I will be Zooming to you. I appreciate their help. So let's start with the Tudors. And as we do so, the face of Henry VII, and I like to describe him as very clever, middle-aged, and insecure. He said, why would you be insecure? I'm king of England and Richard III is dead and life is good. I'm getting married. We're going to have babies. Life is good. Well, it's always easy come, easy go, the business of royal authority. So I guess in terms of Henry VII, even though he could be, let's see, what is the nicest word I can use? Avaricious. He was not just, I think it's nice to be economical. I'm not condemning people who are somewhat conservative in spending, but he was avaricious. He loved it. He collected it, and he probably needed as much as he could get. So he had tight financial ways, and he wanted as much strict government as he could. And of course, he was always anxious to find out if anyone had any doubts about Tudor claims to the throne. And we understand why. Because he wanted them dead, right? I mean, it wasn't like, well, if we need to debate this, I welcome your questions and we can discuss it. No, that's not the way this is going to happen. So definitely some people would die during this period. And he would ensure that. It was like, you know, people who were interested in genealogy, if you've ever been to an archive and people trace families, you could just imagine Henry VII's agents snooping around them and saying, oh, you're interested. Huh, I think maybe we're cousins. Are you familiar with the Tower of London? We've got a room. We can get you right checked in. I mean, it's amazing to think, as we're going to see a genealogical chart soon, exactly the kinds of individuals. Meanwhile, I want to make you aware of two governmental institutions that he really helped to develop, although he did not create them. But they are very interesting to us. We all hear about justices of the peace. I think way back, I used to hear about people going to the justice of the peace to get married or that sort of, I know. But that's all I ever associated them with. And the truth of the matter is they were, as we might think of, sheriffs nowadays, law and order folks. And you can imagine after the time of the Wars of the Roses, there were probably lots of people who needed to be calmed down. So I'm thinking on the local scene, there was plenty for justices of the peace to do. And they were, I would say, motivated and activated by the royal government. And secondly, I thought I would mention the Star Chamber, because the idea is that you feel like maybe this is some sort of astronomical or astrological exhibit, but instead, it is far from it. You are in more or less a place for examination without Miranda warnings. I don't think you're going to get any counsel or could I have a glass of water or could we talk about this? How serious this was going to be, one can only imagine. But I'm sure that we understand that in Tudor times, there is no sense of, have you ever read Magna Carta or do you know who I am? I don't think that matters. I think Henry VII was definitely a type of ruler who was very wary of anyone who might make claims against him, and certainly his authority. notice I speak of dealing with and disposing. It's sort of like, I know it's just like the way if you had termites or you had some other sort of, you would just, and you wouldn't just get a bottle of spray, you Sheriff Hotshot and put them all under arrest. You might have to take more significant actions. And he did. And there were so many, they would just come, what do you say, come out of the woodwork? People who would say, well, I'm a third cousin of so-and-so. And they would actually have imposters. I say they, and here's the funny part about the they in this. These people who would come, I know, would actually be related to the king's wife. Let's remember his wife was, let's see if I can move over here. Okay. And I'm showing more or less, and you can see that he's married to Elizabeth of York. And you see, she's Edward of York's daughter. So in that sense, you say, well, that's just great then, just like in the Shakespearean play, it's like the two roses are coming together and everything is, well, it's end of Act 3 and there's a lot of love going around. Not so fast. Let's remember that tree and understand those Yorkists are going to exist in a variety of family ways. And as we look at them, I suggest you notice, notice here George, and notice George the Duke of Clarence, and you see John Delapoe. You see Margaret up there. There's so many Margarets. She's married to the Duke of Burgundy. We can't stay away from them, can we? So you say, well, she's probably busy in Burgundy and encouraging wine production or whatever. Oh no, she's busy trying to stir up trouble back home. And you say, well, isn't she concerned about her niece, who's the queen? Oh no, despite the fact they are both Yorkists, she wants Henry VII. She wants to make her relative a widow. They're all anxious to depose Henry VII. And by the way, most of them are either dead or defeated. But that's what I want you to appreciate, that Henry VII, I mean, you never get up and say, nobody doubts me. God, they all love me. RateMyKing.com. I'm getting 10 stars. I mean, never. Plots. It fascinates me. Even Margaret of Burgundy sends imposters. If I had more time, there's even stories of an individual who was sort of like a ne'er-do-well. He might have been the kitchen help. He just had peeling potatoes, whatever. And but they got him dressed up and said, now, you are one of the little princes from the tower, but you've come back, you're feeling better, and you had a little cold, or and you weren't feeling well, and now, thanks to Doctors, I'm feeling great. And this Henry VII took my throne. Daddy wanted me to have the throne. Daddy loved me very much. You know, and you say, didn't they know? Maybe they did, but if you don't like Henry VII and you're a gambling person, because you have to be a gambler, you know, to take the odds on that one. If that's going to work for you. But anyway, it's amazing to think about all the plots. And of course, a lot of them ended up as inmates in the Tower of London for longer terms or shorter, depending on when Henry VII decided, I think you'd be better dead. And it was like, yeah, some of them who were Yorkists were actually, they were there for some time before they were eliminated because they just couldn't decide what to do with them. But ultimately, the decision was for death. Now, as far as Henry VII's line, I am sure that in the royal set, people, and you see the yellows, because that explains his dubious claims to the throne. But that's not the thing you would bring up if you were invited to a royal feast. And nobody would say, how did you get to be king, sir? You know, we would maybe say conversation starter. I think that would be considered rude because dubious. However, let's face it, he was king. That's all that counted to him. And he was married to the Yorkist princess. So if you got any other issues, I would keep my mouth shut if I were you. But you can see yourself, his mother, Margaret Beaufort, was from the third marriage of John of Gaunt, and she had been born before the parents were married. They had been, the children, these Beaufort children had been legitimated, but not for the royal succession. And then you can see Henry VII's father, nice title, Earl of Richmond. And you go up to him, and they were Welsh. Nothing wrong with being Welsh, but I'm just saying that he was married, in quotation marks, to the former Queen Catherine of Valois. And I mean, I don't know whether to say strangers in the night or just, do I need to sing something romantic at this point? But because you're thinking about what is the widow of Henry V doing? I don't know, a Franco-Welsh love thing? I don't know. But somehow, it's grandparents of Henry VII, and you're going, really? That's pretty flimsy. Yeah, I think so too. However, Richard III's not here to be critical. And anyone else who had questions or reservations had checked into the tower. So with that in mind, then, we have our first Tudor. With that, then, we get to go to Spain. And we think, why? Why are we so interested? You know, Castile and Aragon, if you go back into my day, which is the 13th and 14th centuries, you could find a lot of interest in those particular areas. But even more so by the 15th century, because as we all learned when we were children, 1492, and sailing that ocean blue. Honestly, that has a lot to do with it, other than the fact, say something harsh, Jenny, forgive me. Both of them, when you bring up France, they might go, yeah. So we love France, but we understand the Spanish and the English can come together. Henry VII, and I told you he had avarice. Oh, terminal avarice. And you know what that means? It means like he just thinks about money and he becomes titillated. Yeah. And you know people like that. But he had a bad case. And so the idea of working out a relationship with people who had lots of gold, it's just a little bit of heaven. So that is really the origins for the Anglo-Spanish connection that will have such amazing repercussions for this Tudor dynasty, as we already know. In this case, you see the uniting of Aragon and Castile and the two provinces, and as interesting as it would be just to note that Ferdinand and Isabella had their own issues to deal with in terms of the Muslims there and their own interest in flexing their own political muscle. In any event, Henry was anxious for a marriage alliance, not because he wanted to be some sort of Cupid, but because he was interested in the dowry big time, because he assumed it would be huge, and it was gold, even better. So he had representatives to Ferdinand and Isabel, and it kind of started out, you know, with the people talking about France. Yeah. Horrible kingdom, you know, and that. And then it got down, well, you know, the king and queen have a daughter. Oh, really? Well, our king has a son. Do you think maybe, I think it maybe will. Maybe we can sit down. You know, it's not like, you know, trying to get the perfect match and trying to say maybe they can just go out to lunch or have coffee. No, this is all about what's it worth to you. Because that dowry, that's very important. I mean, what do children know? They're only about 15, 16, so they know nothing about marriage, but we know about dowries, and we know they're wonderful, you know. So seriously, that was what was the real hang up in terms of the relationship. But they worked it out, and so Henry VII's son, Arthur, and yes, you know where he got that name. We do love Arthur's. And now he would marry Catherine, one of two daughters of Ferdinand and Isabel. And for anyone who does not know, the other daughter will marry, I saw the shaking head, marry into a very prominent imperial family and have significance. And we will get to that very soon indeed. So I'm just trying to hold off on that. because I want you to be aware of this sort of teenage marriage and what Catherine of Aragon must have thought when she arrived at the English shores. I mean, if you were interested, there are actually letters that she wrote home that I assume were written in the vernacular, not Latin, and describing her feelings and sentiments, which were not always positive about that, because once you were in a relationship like this, you never knew if you would ever go home again or you would ever see your family. I mean, it is truly amazing. As far as we are aware, she and young Arthur got along pretty well. I mean, again, I do remind you, it's like we would think of high schoolers now, not even college students. I mean, it's very, very young indeed. And it lasted, as we all know, just a few months. The death of Prince Arthur was an event of sorrow, because even though Henry and Elizabeth had another son and had two daughters, one thinks of Henry VII as being totally wrapped. His idea of the future was so based on Arthur. I was particularly moved one visit to England when I came across a site where the priests were endowed by Henry VII. And you think, he spent that kind of money? For him, that's a big deal, because, you know, he's not very extravagant. But in terms of this process, he was very extravagant. And that process is saying masses for his son's soul. And I thought that was amazing. That just shocked me to think that this is all he could do for Arthur. They're called endowments. And that's all the priests do. It's sort of like a 24/7 thing. Often they could be monks, a monthly priest, I should say. Because no, you know, if you're a monk but not a priest, you can't do it. But just endless masses. And it's like the idea of the more masses, the better. So when one priest finishes, then the next one starts. So yeah, and all of this is through an endowment. So yes, Henry was grieving for his son, no question about that. But the main thing now, after the grieving for the son, is what will happen. Oh, well, Catherine's nice, the daughter-in-law, and she's learning some English, you know, because that's tough for somebody Spanish. I mean, Spanish is so nice and regular, but English can be really difficult. And for Henry, the question is not how can we make her comfortable in a strange country, but how can we keep the dowry? Oh, yeah. Yeah. You just can't really appreciate how people love money until you hear stories like this, because it's all about it. We're not sending it back. No, COD to Madrid. We've got this big package coming in. No, we want it. We want to keep it. Because, see, You know, maybe they were already talking about refunds. You know how like refunds, you know, we don't like something from Amazon, we want our refund. Yeah. But no, we're gonna keep it. Well, how do we keep it? Well, the grieving young widow, who's all of 16, 17. And it's an interesting, I like the picture simply because it really gives you that idea of how young she was as a young bride. In any event, Henry's feelings, Henry VII, that is going to say, we're really sorry. We know this is difficult for you, but I've got a surprise. We've got, we've got a nice young man on the way. He's got some growing up to do. He's junior high right now. So he's still JV, and maybe those of you parents will understand that feeling. And so, I mean, she's older. She's 4 or 5 years older. So, but remember, he's going to grow up. He's going to be a big boy. You can go out to the field, see him do calisthenics, and he'll be up. It's like amazing to think about. She's got to wait around for him to grow up. And believe me, this was a big feeling of surprise for Henry himself, because originally Henry was going to be Archbishop of Canterbury, #1 in the English church. Oh, we've got it all together. King Henry VII had said, now I've got my Arthur, he'll be like Dad, and then my other son will run the church, and he's #2 son, so he'll do what #1 son says. And, you know, it's like everybody got it all fixed up just the way they wanted, but didn't work out. But the idea is Henry, who was going to be this major ecclesiastic, is now supposed to be the new king after his father. As many of you are aware, and he does seem like an attractive fellow, everything hideous, because all I can think about is this man not saying no at the dinner table. You know, it's like going for a bucket at KFC and just digging in. I mean, the man died in his 50s, and I'm sure he had lots and lots of issues that one would avoid if people had known better. But at the time, we can't see ahead. He was attractive. He wrote all kinds of poems, songs. He wrote a work, he may have been ghostwritten, called In Defense of the Seven Sacraments against Martin Luther. Yeah, Martin Luther was already on the rated X list. You know, it's like if you were in that early Tudor period, they knew about Luther. But if you're thinking, oh, I want to get, you know, Martin Luther's greatest hits and maybe read them and maybe get a Luther fan club, and no. And the Pope was so impressed. He said, I just love him. And he said, you know what you are, little Henry? You are defender of the faith. Have you ever thought they still call themselves that? I found that quite ironic. But they do. They certainly do. I don't know whether Charles will if he ever becomes king. But that's what Elizabeth calls herself, defender of the faith. So that is the kind of man he was. But life changes. So we are aware that he definitely changed as he succeeded his father as king. Now, the way he married Catherine eventually was, of course, through papal dispensation. Only in that case could he have married his brother's widow, because otherwise that's considered a no-no, based on the book of Leviticus. You say, how many people read the book of Leviticus? I'm telling you, they are few and far between. Those of you said, I just don't think that's on the greatest hits of the Old Testament. I doubt it very seriously. But if you want to be a legalist and want all of the rules of, how to be a successful member of the Hebrew community, I suppose it would be very nice. But they have papal theorists who work on these things. I'm sure the Pope was too busy. But the idea being that he had a dispensation and he was able to marry Catherine and, of course, keep the dowry. Because, they always have another installment. And so that can be exciting too, if they divide your Amazon order into shipments. And, you say you're excited by the first one, but the second one is still good. That's the way it was for Henry. Oh, there's more. Yeah, that is financial titillation because Henry VII had it. Now, Henry VIII, when he became king, had hard time settling down. He seemed to get along okay with his wife. That is, Catherine of Aragon. It wasn't that. Obviously, the double standard of marriage among royalty and nobility, that is, of having multiple partners, was certainly true for young Henry. But there has always been a question of how seriously he took being an effective king. And looking to this man before you, who definitely I would call a self-made man, Cardinal Wolsey. If you had been Cardinal Wolsey, or just Thomas Wolsey, if you will, I just, give him his major title. Because frankly, and I hate to say this, Frank, but I'm going to use a bad word, and I know that I don't want you to be shocked. He may have been a pluralist. I know. For those who are not into these slur terms, it means you have several different positions in the church. And so you get multiple checks. So, you're thinking like the postal people come and you say, you got my payment? You remember maybe your grandparents or parents used to get Social Security and they're waiting there at the door. It's like that. He could be abbot of this or archbishop of that. And sometime, again, I apologize for saying this, but he was guilty of absenteeism. Yeah, he never got to the place. He meant to. You heard of people who have good intentions? Well, I think he may have. But he was basically worked for the crown and for himself. And he used the church for nice big payoffs. If you weren't careful, if you were Wolsey, and you walk too fast behind you, you might hear somebody say, "Butcher son, butcher son." That's hurtful. Because butchers, you use butchers. You know, if you are a meat eater, and we love our butchers, but to be a highfalutin prince of the church and a major figure in royal administration and having come from butcher people, I don't know, but he did. Just goes to show you, if you have lots of hook and crook and other talents, and you're willing to cut other people's throats, hey, you too can run the royal government. So Wolsey became a major figure, and the king let him do it. That's Henry VIII allowing Wolsey to run it. He manages essentially all relations involving the papacy, England, France, the empire. Oh, yes. He just the Henry Kissinger of the first half. Yeah. Henry VIII. Traveling here, traveling there. Yeah, boss, I got all that taken care of. How do you think he became a cardinal? You think it's because he kissed up the popes? I think not. The Pope did it because the king said, "I wondered, would you do that for Wolsey? He would appreciate it. I would appreciate it. We love you so much." So you think it was favoritism and not based on merit? Yes, I definitely do. It is truly amazing how he became a cardinal, but he wasn't the first or the last, believe me. So it's wonderful while it goes on. I don't know how productive it was, because I think Wolsey would like to have been Pope, if you want to know the truth. If he could have worked it out, but St. Peter had other plans. But as it turned out, it was not particularly useful for Wolsey in the end, as we are going to see. So he's very important. He travels a lot, and as long as the king is involved in, shall we say, his intellectual activities and his romantic activities, and of course, attempting to get a son from his wife, Wolsey has what I would consider to be a lot of latitude in creating policy. How successful he was, I would have to come out pretty negative on that. He was probably more concerned about himself than he was on the best interest of the crown. Just a speculation on my part. But as long as somebody's not watching over you very carefully. Oh, he liked a good life. He was not pursuing a Christ-like life by any means. So he's going to have a lot to answer for in the next world. So we get that, but at the same time, he doesn't seem to have been very effective. Some of you will like this picture of the Emperor Charles V. And you'll notice he's half Spanish because I always have those dogs. They always make these portraits. I always just love that. And the thing that we want to remember about him is that he will end up abdicating this man who's was a descendant of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain and who spent his life dealing with Lutherans and would just think, boy, how am I going to answer to mom and dad and grandma when I get to see them? Because, you know, he actually provided them with a degree of freedom, Lutherans. In any event, Charles V, who was actually, you need to think about this, he was actually the nephew of the Queen of England, Catherine of Aragon. Auntie Kate, yes. So that will create an interesting dynamic between his uncle-in-law, Henry. And then, of course, there was almost this little personal deal between the Valois King of France, that Valois, yes, who one of the most famous, doesn't he just look terribly French, très France? That is, with that Francis I, he and Henry VIII were competitors as fighters, as politicians, and in various ways, because let's face it, by this point, England is not a major player in France as it was back in my day, but we still sense conflict between the English and the French. Interesting, isn't it? The way that Charles V and Francis have connections to this story. Oh, and they both knew the butcher's boy, Cardinal Wolsey. Believe you me, he was working them as hard and wasn't. Oh, child of Christ, maybe we can go to mass together. Oh, I think they would do it. Politics. What do you want? Here's what I want. I think we can work it out and make you happy. You say the filth of lucre? Yes. All kinds of mischief. And it didn't involve the good book either. So there is Catherine, midlife, in a sad life. She seems to have had unbelievably a good marriage with her husband. There's no indication that they had been unhappy. Like most women of that day, she would have had to tolerate his various relationships, affairs, what have you. She had her interests. She was deeply religious. I can't imagine how you could be otherwise if you're the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. I mean, it's not like, oh, what faith would you like to worship with these people this week? Or no, I think there's only one truth, and we got that one down. Now, as far as other children, there had been born to Catherine a son. He lived a few months, I think. But the fact is, she had only one legitimate surviving child, and that was Mary. There was an illegitimate son, and he had been well accepted by his father. You know, I don't know the mother. but she doesn't play a role here because I doubt she was hanging out. However, Catherine would not have said, "Oh, come on in. We're all wives." Like, was that sister wives? I don't think it's going to be something like that. But this guy, who's known as Henry Fitzroy, his father accepted him. He was given a title of nobility, and you might have said ugly things about Cardinal Wolsey, but I don't think they ever said anything bad about Henry Fitzroy. I actually have that picture of him. Look at him with his little pet. I think that's kind of cute. I know that little old dog. You see the little dog there?
It looks like a monkey.
It does, doesn't it?
Look at the tail.
So that's Henry Fitzroy. And of course, there you see the Queen. Queen Mary to be. But at this point, she is being brought up with presumably her father and mother still thinking they could have another son. Because Henry Fitzroy was not legitimate. Now, there are questions, of course, about legitimacy in the people before the Tudors, aren't there? Yes, like grandmother. But we don't bring that up, okay? We don't get technical with me or else. Tower of London. Now, I don't know what kind of animal it is, Jenny. I'm sorry.
Does that say Mary at the age of 28? Because she doesn't look old at all.
That's what it says. Yeah, that's something. So, and at that age, well, she had a very sad life. I will just put it that way. But there's Henry Fitzroy, and don't feel sorry for him. He is well provided for. I mean, I'm sorry, Mom and Dad couldn't be married, and I don't understand these things, but I'm taken care of, and I've got a great portfolio, and I've got a wonderful life. I had checks coming in, so I'm okay. But we know that Henry VIII, had a very deep and abiding interest in women. Yes, I would even say he could have majored in women. They just went on, and that's not something that seems to have cooled down. And we would say, do you suppose there was reciprocity on the part of all these women? I doubt it. But when you are dealing with the king, I suppose the options are limited in case you are interested in advancement, my theory. Meanwhile, of course, people will think about Mary Boleyn and the Boleyn family. And I want to show you where they are from shortly. But right now, I think it was 10 or 20 years ago, Mary Boleyn, there was this sort of Mary Boleyn craze. It was unbelievable. I walked into my room, 2370, and a student was reading a novel about Mary Boleyn. And I thought, is this the kind of lurid material that my students are reading when they should be reading analysis of the English economy in the 16th century? But no. But anyway, Yeah, I was fascinated, and I was asking her questions about the Tudors and so forth. And she wanted to blow me off, but the question is, why is she so interesting? I guess it's because people discovered Mary Boleyn and they decided to use her, the Harlequin folks or the, I'm not sure, the Hallmark people. I don't know who it was, but how lurid she was is another story. She became a go-getter among the entourage of Henry VIII. Her father was a major figure as far as the royal court was concerned, and Mary, who may have had an affair with Henry VIII as well as Francis I, and yeah, let me explain. On one count, she went with her father when he was an envoy to France. And I think her father was what we used to call a panderer. I mean, that's pretty low. I mean, no gift for him at Father's Day, but yes, I think basically she could work rulers. And she ended up with a noble marriage, Mary Boleyn. She was married into the nobility. And so we understand that all works out. But the fact is, the Boleyns are what we used to call upstarts, if you ask me. They're not long established blue bloods. But Thomas Boleyn, the father, was someone who was working hard to move up in Tudor circles, and he was definitely willing to use his daughters. That is a depiction of him, and of course, the more famous daughter, Anne. And by the way, nobody ever discovered what happened to that famous necklace with the bee on it. I'm sure if you ever find it, you could get some big money too. So keep looking, people, keep looking. And but that they can you imagine, because that is so famous that she wore it in basically all the depictions that you see of her. So she was the younger one, and they always make the point, which is very interesting. She's not necessarily so beautiful, but she was very clever. And that was what was so valuable for her. Well, don't you think it was just around the room and somebody would say, yeah, I mean, wouldn't you think like souvenir keepers? I know, yeah. Yeah. So here she is, another Mary. But again, the idea of the rivalry between the two or any such, I doubt it. I think they both had the same purpose of using men to the advantage of their father. And they knew what they were doing, and what they did it well. They had a brother, George, that we'll mention later. But the Boleyn family was a very interesting family. You notice she lived till 1543, so she made it, I guess, to her 50s, which, considering I think the typical life expectancy was about like 35. I think to make it to your 50s, you're thinking, wow, man, yeah, I must be in good shape. Okay, here it is. Now, if you want to have a big party, I mean, I like it here. But if you prefer something a little more substantial and you got some of that Spanish gold, you can make a reservation here. It's not far from London. You can have your guests there. It's called Hever Castle. It's really very beautiful. And it was the Boleyn place. And you're saying, oh, I wouldn't want to stay at a place with such upstarts. Too nouveau to me. So, okay. So you run around with the Windsors. I understand you're high and mighty. I get it. But seriously, it's very beautiful. And you're not going to believe who bought it. This just goes, we're everywhere. We red, white, and blue types. A Waldorf, folks, a Waldorf in the 20th century, and completely redid it. The thing was falling apart. You know how we are. We want to get in there and repair it. So that is the Waldorf Astoria. Yeah. And it became more like we get it today. And I do recommend it for tours if you ever have the opportunity. Hever Castle, and that's where they lived. And that, of course, is what the Boleyns came from. So it's not like they were ever, Anne Boleyn was not living in good circumstances. Now, why were they there? Well, they were maids of honor in the court of the Queen. Could you imagine Catherine of Aragon said, oh yeah, I saw my husband looking her over. I'd love to have her as a member of my court. I don't think that's the way it worked. I think this was chosen for her, shall we say. And I don't think she had to do anything necessarily to be a member of Queen Catherine's court. It's not like you got to work or help do the Queen's hair or makeup or something. I don't think pretty much you were just there for ceremonial purposes and then say, well, hello, Your Majesty, you know, when be coquettish activities, I would say. So that would not necessarily work out so well for the Queen. And a member of Catherine's entourage definitely has plans of her own. And those plans are what they would call perhaps unsavory. Because there is no question that there was an idea of encouraging her own seduction, which might sound weird. I mean, it's like you want to be seduced, but on the other hand, you don't want to go too far. The idea being you want to have a position, but you want that position to be safe and secure. Not just to have another little Fitz child, F-I-T-Z child. I mean, love children are cute, but they don't have the rights and opportunities. So we're going to have a legitimate boy. But we got to space out our relationship. Oh, Henry, I wish I could, Your Majesty, I mean. Oh, I love you so much. I needn't continue. I think you get the idea. After heavy petting or whatever they used to say. I mean, it's like, I can imagine she had that man just wild. She was very good. She had great training from her sister and others, I'm sure. I just have never understood how she got away with it. But when she finally consented, it resulted almost immediately in pregnancy. But I guess biology, I took biology. I think that happens. I mean, it's not like surprise. She was young and apparently he was capable of fathering a child. So there you are. And Henry realizes, or had realized, that in the words of the old song, something's got to give. He had a little time. I believe in biology, we learn 9 months take place. So it's not a lot of time, but enough time for what we need to do. Because remember, it's all about having a son and B, a legitimate son. Okay, because we can have, you say, but what about an illegitimate daughter? No, we're not interested in that. I gave you the 2, and I'm not going back on it. Legitimate son, that's it. And she knows what she's got to do. So, you remember that verse in Leviticus? I think the Pope got that all mixed up, and let's talk to the Pope about it. Hey, Wolsey, why don't you come in here? I got something to talk to you about. Yes, Wolsey's got to go to Rome and get this straightened out. So Wolsey, that last piece of chicken, that last glass of wine, and it's off for the big travel, the big trip. He says, okay, boss, I'll take care of it. I mean, what is it going to be? No problem. Well, it turns out to be a very big problem, bigger than anyone could have imagined. An interesting Pope of the day. His name was Clement VII, his papal name. He was a Medici, in case you want to know about his family background. So he didn't come from poverty. I think he came from a solid background. He was cousins to Leo X, in case you ever want a papal reunion and hang out with any of them. So Clement VII was in a position that was, shall we say, awkward. The city of Rome itself was controlled by the armies of Charles V. Charles V was not getting along with the Pope, which is ironic, isn't it? Because you would think, oh, dynamic duo, I love you. It's like we'll always be together, buddy, love. But true love never runs smooth, they say. So that is the case then, that Clement VII and Charles V. So as far as it goes, Wolsey would find himself in a wee bit of difficulty because Clement VII really does not want to get involved in nullifying the marriage of Charles V's aunt, Aunt Catherine. I love my Aunt Catherine. She's a real sweet lady. And Aunt Catherine, she loves her husband and my cousin Mary. You get the picture. And I think Charles V is probably saying to Pope, I would be really upset if something happened. Ooh. So, yeah, it may be true that he did not want to revoke a previous Pope's dispensation. But, I've always read one Pope named Urban VIII. You don't have to be concerned about him, but I'll tell you about him if you ever want to. Said, the word of one living pope is worth the word of 7 dead ones. And I mean, there's a lot to be said. There's a lot to be said for that. Yeah. I mean, because the dead ones are real quiet. Whereas the living one, yak. So that's true. So I've never been sure about that idea. He did not want to go back on the original papal decree. Whatever the case, Clement VII may appear in his formal paintings serene and so forth, but I bet you he was having some traumatic episodes, because what am I going to do now? So he said, basically, I'm going to send, this is the way we deal with problems. For those of you who've been in positions, we're going to form a committee, an ad hoc committee. I'm thinking, right. So he sends this fellow with Wolsey, Cardinal Campeggio. Boy, I know where he's from. Campeggio was an Italian cardinal, special deputy of the Pope. And I want you to call witnesses. And Wolsey, it was wonderful to see you. Just love you to death. And when you see Henry, kiss, and all of that baloney. And meanwhile, he says, Campeggio, could you come here for just uno momento? Make it slow. Get them over there and you just keep on talking. And maybe have recesses, and like they do in trials. I mean, it's like, get on with it. Get it done. Presto. No, that's not what he was told to do. Wolsey was not in any of this, because Wolsey was, of course, the king's man, not the Pope's man. So off they go. And we know that as Campeggio was stalling, there was still testimony. And the testimony always based on whether legitimately Arthur and Catherine were married, whether they consummated the marriage over that small a point. And of course, the Queen denied it. The king insisted on it, perhaps bribing servants of the young couple to say he overheard it. And all of this infuriated him, because he thought it was going to be a wham bam. It's just like the marriage will be annulled. And you know what happens? The clock is ticking when you're pregnant. That's what I've heard. And so Anne is coming along, as they say. So more or less, this ended up with Wolsey losing his job. He lost his job in part because his services were no longer needed. You had a big job to do and you blew it. It's interesting how he died. He was going to make a final tour of all the places he'd never been to. Like the different places where he was archbishop, or like, oh, I love y'all. It's great to see you. So you go to church here. Yeah. Yeah, I'm the archbishop. Yeah. It's great. And he was just about getting ready to check into the T of L, as we call familiarly the place where you check in but never check out, Tower of London. And then he died. How convenient. Yep. So it's an odd kind of death, but lucky for him, because that neck, that could really hurt. Because because the king doesn't say, oh, you made some mistakes, but I love you very much. No golden parachute, a golden something. So now we're going to use a layman to run the government. How odd. But a beautiful Holbein portrait. And some of these modern HBO or Showtime, whatever, shows are trying to make him out misunderstood, nice guy. I just really have a hard time with this. I'm okay. I just want you to understand that doesn't look to me like someone. I just love people, people who need people and all that. He was one, don't mess with Thomas Cromwell. He was right under Wolsey. And guess what? He got the job and got the position. That's right. And he's not in like, oh, I miss Cardinal Wolsey. I miss him. So you get over it. You move on. And there weren't any stages of grief, okay? The first stage, and he was fine. And he took over. And of course, the king said, the last guy didn't get the job done. What was his name? Wolsey? Yeah. Loser Wolsey. And now you're in charge. Can you get this done? He said, you bet I can. I'm going to get it very well taken. Believe it or not, the person that many of us will know from A Man for All Seasons, I just thought, oh God, I just saw that movie when I was a boy and thought it was just wonderful. I think he won the Academy Award. I don't mean to get into movie history here, but it was quite a play. Paul Scofield played the role. In any event, the idea of Thomas More, the author of Utopia and much else, being either forced into office, encouraged into office, may or may not be true. But he was, and became involved in the king's government, supposedly not realizing that the king would expect him to go along with the king's second marriage. Sir Thomas More, or as Catholics would say, St. Thomas More, becomes an important figure in this particular phase of Henry VIII's reign. I might add, he may have been the actual author of Henry VIII's work on Martin Luther in defense of the seven sacraments. That was the rumor, that Henry VIII was busy with some other extracurricular activities. But just repeating that, don't mean to knock Henry VIII's literary ability, but just I think More would be more likely to have been the author, but he was a great layman and a major literary figure of the day. So, tired of being bothered with all of this legal business and tired of putting up with Italians and people delay because biology won't wait. Nope. Okay, we're agreed then. I didn't do well in biology. I'm saying that, but I do know that they can't say like extension. Could I have the baby a month from now, 2 months from now? No, no, it's coming. So luckily, and this is how it works, the elderly Archbishop of Canterbury died. And it's almost like something out of a movie, isn't it? But this is real life. The old Archbishop died. And boy, I bet he was kind of glad. I mean, usually you don't think people are happy to die, but I think if I'd been in his position, I would say it's not a good job to have, because you are stuck with going against the king or going against the Pope. And so instead, you're saying, I'm out of here. And so, there's not an Archbishop of Canterbury. There's not a number one in the English church. I know who would be good. This new guy came and visited me, and I really like him. He hadn't had a lot of jobs, but I understand, ratemyprofessor.com, he's just 5 stars. His name was Thomas Cranmer. You Episcopalians and your prayer book, you think about Thomas Cranmer every time you use it, because whatever edition, that's right. He was a master writer. Henry VIII didn't care about that. What Henry VIII cared about was that as a professor, he had given his legal opinion that the marriage of of Catherine to Arthur was essentially a true marriage, and therefore the marriage of Catherine to Henry was null and void. And the king's going, oh, maybe during his job interview, you know. And those professors, you know, they're always after a big fancy job. So he made him Archbishop of Canterbury, theology professor, grading blue books, sitting around, you know, pulling dusters together, and then suddenly head of the English church. Not a bad promotion, all for saying what the king wants to say. Was he just a lapdog? I have never thought so, but you will understand that the king wanted, shall we say, to be affirmed. He wanted somebody who agreed. And he got that with Thomas Cranmer. So, with the marriage of Catherine, and there wasn't a divorce. We're not going to Reno. There's no Nevada element here. I really find that so grotesque. The marriage is declared null and void. And Catherine becomes, oh, I like this title, Princess Dowager of Wales. That's nice. And I mean, you get checks. I don't want you to think she's going to have to live in poverty. And she and Mary can hang out. As far as I know, she never was ugly about Henry. She just said, your father and I we went our separate ways. And so, you know, because she prayed a lot. for his wretched soul. And I hope she could help, but talking about the husband, so-called husband. And that marriage is now declared null and void. And that means that finally he can marry the woman who is going to have his son. Oops, something happened. It's a girl. And this, of course, would be the great Queen Elizabeth and the next two stillborn sons. A very ironic situation, isn't it? He did get married, though, to Anne Boleyn. Whether or not, when he went in to see new mother and daughter, if he said, darn, rats, shoot, or any of those other things we say. But in any event, that would be Anne Boleyn's last opportunity for a long-term survival, because I don't think she was a very pleasant person. Remember that old column where we would show, can this marriage be saved? Remember that? I think this one is not one that I would waste a lot of time on. Therapy, counseling, it's going to be in. So we will see how all this result next time on Zoom. Thank y'all very much. Thank you.